Welcome to your Get That Nugget for GCSE English Literature. Today we're going to be concentrating on giving you some information that you can use in order to answer the Shakespeare section of Paper 1. This session is meant to complement your lessons with your teachers and not to replace them in any way. With the English Literature Shakespeare question, you will need to include lots of information about context. That is not to say that you just need to write a list of information about the time that the play was written, but you need to be able to understand how the time that the play was written affects what is written and affects what Shakespeare was going to do. So the play was written during the reign of James I. Now, James I came to the throne off the back of Queen Elizabeth's reign. Queen Elizabeth had had no children and had therefore left no heirs, and people were quite hopeful that the country would return to Catholicism, that with her death there would be more fairness for Catholics and that the country would be more united. However, James I came down from Scotland as an incredibly Protestant ruler. He came down and rather than actually making life easier for Catholics, made it harder for Catholics. What that meant is that throughout his reign, he had to deal with Catholic plots and people who were trying to take his throne away from him and put someone else in the place. The most famous of which would be the November the 5th gunpowder plot. So James I is incredibly Protestant. And therefore survived lots of plots. This links directly to Macbeth taking Duncan's throne. And so we see the themes start to emerge of what was going on at the time. In addition to that, we have a thing in place, or a thing that is believed called the divine right of kings. And that means that if you were on the throne, you had been chosen by God. And therefore, if anyone did anything against the king or against the queen, they were going directly against God. And therefore, anyone that was challenging the king would ultimately have an unpleasant end. And we see that again with Macbeth's death. So even though he got the throne, because he had done it in a way that challenged God and challenged the king, he was never going to succeed. In addition to that, we have the Great Chain of Being. And at this time, that was essentially a hierarchy of where you stood in the country. And right at the top of that, we have God. Just underneath that, we have the king. Going all the way down to the bottom where you have stones. It was believed that witches essentially wanted to disrupt that great chain of being, because if you disrupted it, you caused chaos. And so what we see in the play is an obsession with that chaos, an obsession with witchcraft, trying to lay the blame of what happens onto the witches, which excuses the people who are on the throne to a certain extent. So we're only going to use this to explain why it's important in Macbeth. We have the fact that at the time we had lots of plots, Catholic plots specifically, in order to take the throne away from James I. So we see that plotting in the play, and that is Macbeth taking the throne. We have the divine right of kings, this idea that if you are on the throne, you've been chosen by God, and therefore when Macbeth challenges that, he is challenging God, which is ultimately why he has to die at the end of the play. We have the Great Chain of Being, which talks about the natural order of the world. If that is disrupted, it creates chaos. And the idea that witches wanted to create chaos. Now, James I had quite an obsession with witchcraft. He believed that witches were out to get him. He believed that they were trying to destroy the world. He believed that they were ultimately on some sort of mission to create chaos and to ruin his life. He had survived quite a bad sea crossing and had felt that witches had done that, because whilst witches were known to not be able to kill people, they could affect the weather, which could lead to death, and they could affect people. And therefore, this is again what we see in Macbeth. The witches don't directly kill Duncan. The witches don't directly do anything except put the idea in Macbeth's head that he could be king, relying very much on his ambition to push him over the edge. We also see after his death that the world is described as chaotic. The weather is chaotic. Animals are behaving strangely. And so what Shakespeare is doing in the play, recognising that James I is now on the throne, is he's writing a play that will appeal to the king. He's writing a play that will resonate with the king. And he is essentially agreeing with the king that witches are there to create chaos, that witches are a problem. So Shakespeare includes the witches and is sort of suggesting to everyone watching the play that they need to be wary of witchcraft. They need to not listen to witches. Unfortunately, Macbeth listens to the witches. Chaos is created, and then order is re-established with his death. He also includes Banquo as a heroic character, someone who is wronged, because Banquo was a real person, Macbeth was a real person, but Banquo was a relative of James I. And so what Shakespeare is doing here is he is establishing that the great chain of being needs to stay intact. He is establishing that witches and witchcraft have the ability to destroy everything. And he is acknowledging the Catholic plots that James I is living through. Because what we need to do is not just write a list of things that happened. People believed in witches. King James I was a Protestant. We need to be able to explain why they are relevant in the play and why Shakespeare included them. So we have witchcraft, which was a big thing for James I. We have the fact that witches couldn't kill, and we see that in the play. At no point do they cause harm to anyone. They tell Macbeth things that they know will affect him. After Duncan's death, we see the chaos. We see the weather being crazy. We see animals behaving in a way that they shouldn't. All of this linking to the idea that that great chain of being has been disrupted, and therefore witchcraft is disrupting the world. So what I want to leave you with is a question that will ensure that you understand how you can use context in your essay. So how does Shakespeare write the play to appeal to James I? You need to be looking at the fact that witchcraft is included. You need to be looking at the idea of the disruption of the great chain of being. And you need to be looking at the divine right of kings, the fact that the king is chosen by God. And if you challenge the king, you are challenging God.